Hello and welcome to Psych Space, a space to talk about all things psychology related. I'm Declan and today I want to talk to you about what it's like to study psychology as an undergraduate degree here in the UK. I started my undergraduate degree back in 2017. It took 4 years to complete, but that's only because I completed a placement year in the third year of my degree. Since not everybody completes a placement year as part of their degree, I'm mainly going to be focusing on years 1, 2 and 4. Now, if you're really good with dates, you might realise that the fourth and final year of my degree was impacted by the COVID-related lockdowns, so full disclosure, my experience might be a little bit different from yours. Now, even with these obvious differences, like whether or not you complete a placement year, whether or not you're impacted by a pandemic, you might still be wondering, how does my experience reflect what yours could be like, given that there are hundreds of different universities out there that offer a psychology degree? Now, there can be significant differences across courses, so it's really important to do your own research. But the one thing that most courses should have in common is the British Psychological Society, or the BPS. Now, the BPS, they approve most courses across the UK, and it means that there are certain key components of degree courses which are consistent across universities that ensure you're all qualified to become an assistant psychologist like myself, or you're qualified to go on further training, so for instance to become a clinical psychologist or a counselling psychologist. So if you're dead set on becoming a psychologist, I definitely recommend that you do your research and make sure that the course you sign up for is approved by the BPS. Otherwise, there is the option of completing a master's degree that is accredited by the BPS. However, this is a big commitment, so better to do your research and choose the right course for you in the first place. So how do you imagine a typical day as a psychology undergraduate student? Do you imagine attending lectures focused solely on very specific mental health conditions and then going off to workshops, maybe practicing some therapy skills to help people with the conditions you've been learning about? Well, if so, you might be a little bit disappointed. You might have noticed the BSc at the start of a psychology degree, which stands for Bachelor of Science. That, as it suggests, means that psychology is a science, despite what some people who study so-called hard sciences might try and tell you. Psychology is first and foremost a science at degree level. So that means there is a significant emphasis placed on research skills and, even more scarily, statistics. In fact, approximately half of my first year was spent focused solely on research skills and statistical analysis. So whether that's learning how to write a research paper, or how to complete a specific statistical test, or how to run that test through a computer software program. So it really wasn't quite what I was expecting, and I can imagine for others who perhaps hadn't read the course description, it came as an even greater surprise. What was perhaps even more surprising was the lecture content itself. It hadn't just been clinical psychology and developmental psychology or forensic psychology like you might imagine. They're also quite random topics like vision and hearing, animal behaviour, environmental psychology, all of these slightly unusual subjects which I found to be really interesting, particularly given that most of the time we were being lectured to by experts in these fields of study. But again, there was a real emphasis on research, with the lecturers themselves being researchers for the most part, as opposed to practicing psychologists or therapists. I really recommend looking at the specific course descriptions for wherever you're thinking of applying to look at the breakdown of modules to see if the subjects are those that interest you. On a typical day in uni, I wouldn't have too many lectures, certainly when compared to some other subjects. It might have been somewhere between 2 and 4 hours worth, as well as the occasional smaller group seminar where you might meet with your tutor group and go through a research paper that you all meant to have read, or you might be giving presentations on specific subjects. So that made a nice change from always being in a massive lecture hall. This meant that outside of lectures there was plenty of time for completing your recommended reading, as well as any additional reading or further reading relating to the subjects you're most interested in that you want to complete. You're also expected to be working on coursework assignments. in my degree, typically a coursework assignment might have been quite a general essay, or it might be a critical review of a piece of research which is related to the module you're studying, or it could even be a group research project where you all come together to jointly complete a piece of research and write up the research report, for which you all get allocated the same grade for the assignment. So that can be challenging depending on who you're with and what specific section of the research report you end up writing. I was terrible for avoiding writing up the results section, which I came to regret in final year when I had to do my own research project. For most modules, half of your marks come from your coursework, whereas the other half come from sitting an exam. For a typical module that wasn't to do with research or statistics specifically, the exam would have 3 sections, 1 multiple choice and then 2 essay style questions. So multiple choice section had a series of about 50 straightforward questions where you either get it right or you get it wrong. If you get too many wrong, you actually get deducted marks, which I thought was particularly harsh. But then when it came to the essay questions, you got normally a list of between 2 and 4 questions, so you could choose the question that was based around the topic that you were most interested in or confident about writing. As I mentioned, my final year of study was during the pandemic, so because of that, a lot of the exams, well, all of the exams were put online, which meant you got emailed out some essay question and you were given 24 hours to complete it. Some people might have found that easier. I'm kind of mixed as to what I thought about it, because on the one hand, it gets rid of that anxiety of walking into an exam hall, but at the same time, it almost feels like it spreads the pain over 24 hours, and I almost felt guilty going to sleep on exam days because I felt like that's extra time I could be putting into answering the questions. I'm not sure how many exams are online now since the pandemic, or at least the lockdowns have ended. The one module that requires no exam whatsoever is the final year research project. Now, this is the biggest module in the entire degree, and so it carries the most credits with it, so it can have a big influence on your final year grade. So even though you have the entire year to work on it, it's really important not to procrastinate and refuse to get on with it, because there's a lot to do. You're in charge of everything that's involved in a typical research project. You need to recruit participants, you need to do some research around the topic you're focused on, to write your introduction, you need to complete the research itself, you need to analyse the results and write up your results, your discussion, and you get a lot of support with this. You get a supervisor for the project who you might meet with on a weekly or a fortnightly basis for a bit of guidance. It's rare for an undergraduate degree, but there may be some opportunities depending on your supervisor and your area of study to even think about publishing your assignment. But for that to be done, it would have to be a top quality first class piece of work. In order to recruit participants for my final year research project, I had to actively participate in other students' research during the first and second years of my degree. In return for participating in a study, you'd get given so many credits, and once you achieved, say, 100 credits, you would pass that module for the year, and it was simply pass or fail. That meant when it came to your final year, you got back that same number of credits to give out to other students in return for them participating. Overall, I thought this was a good system because it meant that you got the opportunity to actively participate in other students' research, which meant you got to learn more about their studies and what it's like to be a participant. You get given an information sheet at the start of a study, and then you'd complete the task and be given a debrief form or an explanation by the researcher, so you get a full understanding of what it was that they were doing. So if you're interested in research in particular, this can be quite a valuable use of your time. Studies that I most remember participating in included one where I had electrodes stuck to my head in order to scan my brain as part of an EEG scan for a study. That was particularly interesting but annoying because I had glue in my hair when I had a lecture immediately afterwards. I can also remember doing questionnaires like the autism quotient, or I can remember one task in which my eye movement was tracked. So there was all sorts of interesting studies involved. While it's important to learn as much as possible about the degree course you're getting yourself in for, it's also important to consider that university is about so much more than just getting your degree. For so many people, it's their first time moving away from home, developing independent living skills. You get to make new friends, you get to form lasting relationships, you can participate in clubs and societies. It can make such an impact on your life outside of whatever the subject is that you're studying. Thanks for listening if you've stuck with me this long. It's important to remember this is only a brief overview of what a psychology degree entails, but if you have any further questions or ideas for future videos, please feel free to leave a comment below.